All right, my name is Heather Gray, and the program is Just Peace, and I'm here with Cliff Albright. And tonight we're going to be continuing a discussion about the elections. Am I right, Cliff?
That's right, the elections and beyond.
The elections and beyond. So we have on the line Wendell Paris from Mississippi. Wendell has this long, incredible history of activism in the South. He was in the 1960s, and Wendell, you're going to correct me if I'm wrong here, but if I get the dates wrong, in the 1960s, you were working with H. Rap Brown, now known as Jamil El-Amin, and organizing in Alabama. In the 1970s, you became the first director of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives Training Center in Alabama, and then ultimately you became the NAACP field director in Mississippi, and in the meantime doing all this great work in the South, working for justice. So that's Wendell Paris. Wendell, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Heather. It's nice that you would invite me to participate here.
Well, if there's anyone that we're going to be talking with about what happened in the election or getting the Southern perspective, it's you, Wendell.
Except for about 8 months of my life, 8 months in New York City and then 3 months in the Republic of Israel. I lived either in Alabama or Mississippi. We used to say I grew up in Alabama, and then I was born in 1945, all through into the 60s, and I moved to Mississippi in 1990, and I lived here. So I've worked the states of Alabama and Mississippi, especially in the Mississippi Delta and the Alabama Black Belt, the two regions that's known for their prolific cotton production, basically all of my life.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you talked about all the years that you spent in Mississippi and Alabama, because some folks, a lot of black folks that I know, looking at the results of the elections and looking at how many people have just been shocked, dismayed, frightened, and some of the folks I know in Mississippi, Alabama have basically responded like, well, welcome to our lives. Like, welcome to Mississippi.
Welcome to the real world.
Right. Their perspective has, and they're not trying to be cold or unfeeling or anything like that, but their perspective is we've been dealing with this in Mississippi, Alabama for decades, generations, and so welcome to our reality. That basically what you've seen is the Southern strategy just gone national. So, what's your perspective on that?
Donald Trump brought it to full fruition.
That's right.
Full fruition, but much fuller fruition than has ever been realized since it first came on the scene with the Republican Party in 1964. Donald Trump has, that the Southern strategy was based on fueling the fires of racism, largely from disgruntled whites who, since blacks had now become a part of had begun to register to vote and were voting the Democratic Party, then they decided that they needed to open up the Republican Party of the South to have whites come and participate there, because they know that they were, as J.L. Chestnut would say, about 95% of the whites who went to the Republican Party from the Democratic Party were Dixiecrats. Mm-hmm. So you have all of these Dixiecrats that's representing the Republican Party in the South.
So, Wendell, as far as the Southern strategy is concerned, I know that one of the things you talk about is that this was used by Alabama Governor George Wallace, right?
Yes, that's where they got the idea from. In 1954, when Governor Wallace first ran for governor, and I don't know, you'd probably have to bleep this, but he said, they out-niggered me that time.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And since they out-niggered me that time, he said they would never do that again. Mm-hmm. So in 1958, when he ran, it wasn't nothing but N-word, N-word, N-word. Every other word George Wallace said, it was the N-word. So that is what the folks who were putting together the Southern strategy, especially with Barry Goldwater and with Richard Nixon in the mid '60s and into the early '70s, that is what they based the Southern strategy on, of the George Wallace strategy. You know, George Wallace was the arch racist. You didn't find a person more racist than George Wallace. When he stood in the schoolhouse door at the University of Alabama, segregation today, segregation yesterday, segregation forever. And he lived that all of his life. He never ventured from that. But Wallace used it basically as a political strategy. Mm-hmm. And he was always successful since that first time that he ran and lost. He never lost another race in Alabama for governor. Mm-hmm. When he had served 2 terms, he ran his wife, and so he continued to run the government under the auspices of Governor Lilleen Wallace, who was basically the same, didn't change anything. It was still George Wallace. And he came right back, and they just loved him. So when Lee Atwater and all of those started looking at developing this Southern strategy, they said, well, we will follow the George Wallace strategy, the George Wallace methodology that he used to become governor of Alabama is what the Republican Party decided that they would follow back in 1964, and it is clear that each and every Republican candidate since that time has used the Southern strategy.
So what is
try to win on? Mm-hmm.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll continue with this discussion. Hold on. All right. Again, the program is Just Peace, and I'm here in the studio. My name is Heather Gray, and I'm here in the studio with Cliff Albright. We're talking with Wendell Paris from Mississippi about the elections and the use by Trump of the Southern strategy. And before we went to that break, we were talking about this being a strategy that was really developed by Governor George Wallace in Alabama. So everybody seemed to learn from Wallace. Is that right, Wendell?
Everybody learned from him. They said we can take the Wallace strategy here. What Wallace is ranting and raving on racism, we can take that and realign the Southern conservative vote in the South. So whereas whites had voted solidly Democratic, I guess all the way since, all the way back to the Reconstruction and especially the post-Reconstruction era of the late 1800s, they were voting the Democratic Party, but they left the Democratic Party largely following George Wallace and ended up in the Republican Party following Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan, when he was running against Jimmy Carter, Reagan, a part of the Southern strategy was you just didn't come out like George Wallace did later on and say the N-word, 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 but you put in place the coded language. And except unless you understand the coded language of the Southern strategy, then you cannot understand what it is that they are doing. Mm-hmm. Like busing, that was a coded word, and the coded language was made the same as the N-word that George Wallace was saying. But they used busing, they used welfare queens, they used stage rights. Donald Trump and the others here, their coded language for the N-word was Obama, or Obamacare, anything associated with President Obama. They were saying, well, that is what Hillary Clinton is going to do. She's going to carry on, she's going to continue the efforts that were started with Obamacare under President Obama. So it meant then that Hillary Clinton was going to carry on those principles that they were just so opposed to, that George Wallace called under the N-word. But Lee Atwater knows was very clear. You can't say the N-word after 1964. Around 1964. You can't say that. So you got to come in with this coded language. And what happens is that our people, especially, our people being the solid Democratic voters of the South, black and white, do not have a full appreciation of how racist that coded language is. See, like Reagan came into Neshoba County, Mississippi, in 1979, when he kicked off his campaign for president of the United States. He came to Neshoba County, Mississippi, to the Neshoba County Fair. Now, Neshoba County, right outside Philadelphia, Mississippi, is in Neshoba County. That's where the 3 civil rights workers were killed. Cheney, Goodwin, and Swerner. They were killed right outside of Philadelphia in Neshoba County. So when he came to the Neshoba County Fair and said 3 times, "The South shall rise again. The South shall rise again. The South shall rise again." By the time he said it the 3rd time, and that was the only sentence that was needed to get those traditionally diehard Democrats in the Democratic Party to come to follow Reagan. In fact, it's absolute that the only state that stayed with Jimmy Carter after he said the South should rise again, it was his home state of there in Georgia. Every other state in the South voted Republican, has been voting Republican ever since.
Well, that's what Johnson said, right? When the '64 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act were passed, he said, "We've just handed over the South to the Republicans," and he was right.
Right.
So
yeah, he was right there.
Yeah,
he was, because we have to understand how deeply entrenched racism is in this country, Heather.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks don't like to say that, but listen, it's for any factor that you can use in determining a political outcome. The majority factor is always going to be people going to vote based on race. Folks vote based on race, and the election process is good for that because they don't have to come out in the public and do it. They can do that. They're going in that voting booth by themselves, and although folks will skin and grin, "Yeah, I'm with you." When you have fueled those racial fires, then folks will go to that voting booth and vote racist every time. That is my history of voting in the South. I registered to vote on my birthday in 1966 in Macon County, Alabama. And May of that same year, we elected the first black sheriff since Reconstruction. So here, they knew early on that we weren't just talking about participating in politics and voting for white people all of the time. Mm-hmm. But in those communities where we had an opportunity, we talked about taking control of it, putting them under political control of the majority of the people in those particular areas. Georgia has a black belt. Mississippi has a black belt. It's called a Delta. And you have the Alabama black belt. But in that sickle shape from North Carolina around to Texas and down to Florida, where Dr. King said we need to develop in this area pockets of power. Pockets of power. Dr. King never did get around to embracing the concept of black power, but he did say we need to develop pockets of power. And at his death, all of his lieutenants came out with soul power. But in those pockets of power across the South that Dr. King talked about, that's the area where black people should be in control because you're in the majority. We believe in majority rule.
So let's pick it. Let me jump in right there because that's a good point. I want to come back to that important point that you're making about local pockets of power, because part of the Southern strategy and part of what Trump did is basically it's partially about the language, but it's also about the geography. It's about the votes. It's about the delegates. And Trump and his team they had a strategy. They believed, and he was consistent with it throughout his campaign, that there's enough white votes. There's enough white votes out there. If he just galvanizes the white vote, galvanizes his base, that he doesn't have to worry about losing 90% of the black vote or, whatever, 70% of the Latino vote. It should have been higher than that, but that's another story. But they made a calculation that there's enough white folks out there that are mad, and if we just galvanize them, we can win. And if anything, we don't need to get the people of color vote, but if we can just suppress it enough and suppress it in two senses, suppress it in the voter suppression sense of closing polling places, restricting early voting and all of that, voter ID, but also suppress it in the other sense of if we could just make people be tired enough of this, and angry enough at Hillary, then some number of them just won't come out and her vote will be lower. It'll be suppressed in that sense. So that was their calculation, and they won, right? And so you have a lot of people now.
Part of the calculation was you're saying suppress suppress the black vote or suppress the vote of minorities and all of the minority population. But at the same time, we're going to reinstill fear in there. So they had that fear element put back in there. You know, that's been a part of. I mean, that's not new to Trump. You know, you remember Michelle Bachmann and Sarah Payton, as I call her, and I'll tell you why later on. But Sarah Payton was saying, if ballots won't, bullets will. If ballots won't, bullets will. Now, you know, the United States castigated Malcolm X back in 1964 for calling for the ballot or the bullet.
That's right.
And you're going either you want the ballot or you're going to suffer the bullet.
Right.
They said, if we don't take it by the ballot, then we'll take it by the bullet. And, you know, the effort was to try to put that, reinstill or instill in some or reinstill in others that fear that keep you from going out and participating in full, along with the other two things. Now, you know, because we can't justify folks not turning out to vote because it was clear. So people that you needed to go out and vote, and so folks, our people, especially in the urban centers, and also in rural communities, chose not to go out and vote. So they voted for Trump in essence because they decided that they wouldn't vote at all.
Right. And so the question that people have been asking is, what do we do now, and how do we deal with this national reality of folks waking up and realizing that America is still racist America, that it's not a post-racial society, right? That this Southern strategy worked on a national level, and so some folks are trying to deal with that national question, that presidential question, right? Well, but other folks, and I think this is what I hear you saying, are saying, look, you know, we need to start at home. That all politics is local, and that if we can organize ourselves and get that local power, whether it's at a municipal level or county level, then that's where the solution is. You know, so can you speak on that a little bit? You started to talk about that, but can you speak about that that local strategy a little bit?
My friend C.J. Jones puts it best when he said there are basically now in the United States two sets of people, and they either fall into organized money or organized people. But he says that organized people always outrule or overrule organized money. And if you're going to organize anything, you need to start at the grassroots level, at the ground level. You can't do any top-down organizing here. It has to be from the bottom up. Which means that everybody must have a better understanding that this political process is not a participatory sport. You got to participate. You can't sit on the sidelines here. So but you just can't go out there and vote and not have some organized vote behind you. So you need to be tied to some organizational effort, because you cannot do it by yourself. You cannot do it by yourself. And our communities have to push to the point where we stop a lot of people, especially a lot of black people, from running for the same offices. And they'll come out and say, well, we all have a right to run. Yes, you do have a right to run. But your individual rights do not supersede the rights of the community. The community has some rights. And so we have to organize people to the point where they recognize that this is a community effort, and these are the candidates that are best suited to fill the specific interests that we have, our personal interests that we have in our local community. So that must start at the local level. But we just can't stop at the local level. We must go regional, then we must go statewide, and then national in organizing folks to understand this process first, and then to come out and participate in some concerted fashion, just to vote your individual self. You know, that individualistic thing that they put on us is, it's not productive in our communities. You got to have an organized vote, and that organization must start at the local level.
I just want to tell our listeners that you are listening to WRFG-Atlanta 89.3 FM. The program is Just Peace, and my name is Heather Gray. I'm here in the studio with Cliff Albright, and we're talking with Wendell Paris from Mississippi. I just want to mention, Wendell, that here we're talking about the use of the Southern strategy that Trump used in order to win the election. However, the other thing is that it's coupled with a lot of the strategies that people were using, I think primarily in the South. For example, using the cross-checking that would take people off the poll if there's a name of someone else with that same name or same last name in another state. We're going to be talking with Greg Palast in a couple of weeks about this, but Greg Palast says basically that Trump did not win under the circumstances when you look at the number of people who were thrown off the polls with this cross-checking. So he's going to challenge, I think, the Electoral College before it meets on December the 19th. So that's interesting too. I'm just saying that there were a lot of ways that the elite, particularly in the South, were doing what they could to undermine the voting rights of the people.
Most definitely. And it goes back to that 2013 ruling from the United States Supreme Court, and what was called that Shelby, Alabama case, and which got rid of especially Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
Until Earl Shinhoffer, y'all know who Earl Shinhoffer was, my good friend that was killed in an automobile.
That's Earl Shinhoffer.
Earl was, for the longest, the regional director of the NAACP and was based there in Atlanta.
Right.
Earl said, without Section 5, you don't have a Voting Rights Act. And so that's basically where we are. We don't have Section 5, which means the folks will say, yeah, but you can file a suit under Section 2. Some of the other sections, there are ways to get at it. Right. But when you're talking about filing suits, in this day and age, you're talking about having a lot of money to do that. And you would almost need all of the resources of the NAACP, CORE, and SCLC fighting in one state just to try to hold back this barrage of voter suppression activities that are taking place and will take place. It's difficult to amass those kind of resources that you need to really fight because you don't have the committed lawyers and legal people that we had back during the 1960s who were fighting right there with us, tooth and nail, to make the needed changes that are needed across this country, and not only in the South.
Talk about briefly that case in Alabama that took off Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. Wendell?
Yeah, that's a Shelby County case.
Right.
Now, it wasn't a county suit that they were bringing, but blacks represent probably no more than 35% of the population of Shelby County. And they're about 25% of the population of the city of Calera. And so this whole Shelby County case centers around a white that ran in the so-called black district that was created out of some folks filed under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act to get them to come up with single election districts in the city of Calera, and to have one of those districts with a voting age population of perhaps 65%, that would allow black a reasonable chance of winning it. So when he came in and said, this white fella ran for that seat and lost it, because he filed a petition to say that his rights were being denied him because it was the Voting Rights Act that said that you had to have that didn't say you had to have, but put in place this district there, which was a portion so that a black could win that district. And they took that case where in Calera, Alabama, where you have less than 25% black votes and wiped out all of the provisions that were granted under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. Now, under Section 5, remember now, that was called the pre-clearance section, which simply meant that before any law could be changed that was in place in 1965 when the Voting Rights Act was first passed, before anything could be changed, they had to first submit it to a federal district court in Washington, D.C., or they had to send it to the Justice Department itself in Washington, D.C. It didn't go through the local federal courts because, a lot of times they're just as racist as the state courts are. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing that going all the way up to the Supreme Court now. But you had to submit to the Justice Department and to a special court in Washington, D.C. any changes any changes that had to be made. It just did not deal only with voting now. It dealt also with, say, if you wanted to change a voting place, that had to be pre-cleared. If you wanted to draw some more district lines, that had to be pre-cleared. So the South was sitting like a coiled rattlesnake, just waiting on some case to come through to where they could get rid, could outlaw the temporary provisions under the Voting Rights Act. Now, you need to understand now, I'm saying all of the Voting Rights Act is temporary. Mm-hmm. It was a temporary act that was passed in 1965. It was extended in 1970. It was extended again in 1975. It was extended for 25 years in 1982, and it was extended again in 2000.
Something like that.
I don't know, 2007 or 8 or something like that. I can't remember.
During Bush's.
But it was still temporary provision. Because the country is still not prepared to give to, especially black people and other minorities around this country, a full-fledged right to vote in this country. You don't have that yet. You never have had it. And with Mr. Trump going to name these people to the Supreme Court, we won't be getting it anytime soon. So we have to have some more methods in place, some organizational methods in place that are going to assure us of our continued right to vote, our temporary right to vote that's given us in the land of the free and in the home of the brave.
Wendell, I just wanted to move on to Jeff Sessions. And this brings us to additional voting rights information, actually, and conflicts with what Sessions was doing in Alabama. Now, it looks as if Trump wants to have him as his attorney general.
And you need to call Jefferson Davis Sessions by his full name so people will know what you're dealing with. His name is Jefferson Davis Sessions.
All right.
He is a senator from Alabama. And Jefferson Davis Sessions is a bigger racist as George Wallace. And the Congress made that. Yeah. So when you're looking at it, you look at how his own people treat him. Senator Howard Heflin, who was the senator in Alabama at that time, would not vote for Jefferson Davis Sessions to get a federal judgeship in the state of Alabama. Now that's how bad Jefferson Davis Sessions is. He tried to put me in jail in the Alabama Black Belt because we were voting absentee ballots in large numbers across the Black Belt, and so he had and the local white people recognized that we had gotten out. We understood absentee voting as well. We had come to understand absentee voting and the power of absentee voting as well as they understood it. But we had a lot of more people who were legally prepared and should have been voting absentee because of health conditions, because of age, because of school populations, people in college and attending school away from home, and folks who worked outside of the county, who actually in Alabama had a legitimate right to vote absentee if you worked outside of the county. So Jefferson Davis Sessions, J.D. Sessions, put in place a witch hunt in the state of Alabama to stop black people from voting in those counties where you had black population that ranged from a low of about 55% to a high of about 87%. So in those counties where you had blacks taking political control, the local white people called on the federal government to come in through the FBI and other intimidation tactics to take the right to vote away from us, to put to jail target people who were responsible for getting a large turnout in terms of absentee voting. They said to us, well, boom, the reason that we are coming against you is that Jefferson County, where Birmingham is located, didn't vote with 300 absentee ballots. And here you are in Sumter County, which has a total population of 17,000 people, and you're voting 900 absentee ballots. And we replied to the FBI, if we lived in Birmingham, we would be voting 30,000 people absentee, because you have that many people who are qualified to do so. Mm-hmm. But here was Sessions leading this charge on the part of the FBI and the federal government to disfranchise black people in the Alabama Black Belt. But we beat him.
Right.
We beat him every time.
Right.
Every time the people in Perry County, Alabama, Albert Turner, Albert led that new that pulled the casket for Dr. King in 1968. Albert is the one leading that. Right. Albert was the second one on the SCLC side to go over that bridge from Selma to Montgomery March. Hosea Williams led it for let's see what. Hosea and Andy flipped the coin, and Hosea lost. Andy is Andy Young there,
right?
And Hosea lost the coin flip, so he was the one to represent SCLC. Then John Lewis was marching next to him, was representing SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Immediately behind SCLC and the leadership of SCLC and Hosea Williams was Albert Turner. And marching next to him was Bob Nance from SNCC, representing on the SNCC side. So you had the two national leaders, Hosea and John Lewis, and then you had the two state leaders, Albert Turner and Bob Nance. So now it was Albert Turner that they came at in Perry County. That's the county where Mrs. King and his first wife were. They came out of Perry County, Alabama, and Perry County is where Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed in Marion, Alabama. It started the whole voting rights that Selma to Montgomery March really started in Marion, Alabama, under the leadership of Albert Turner. So they came after the stalwart leadership that it was the entrenched leadership of the Black Belt. Albert was around a fourth generation farmer and bricklayer out of Perry County, and so those are the people that they came at first.
So Sessions got so he's got this long history of being, anti-black and, racist, anti-civil rights, getting denied a federal judgeships because of his racism. And there's several articles, and we've posted a couple on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/JustPeace WRFG. We also posted a video of Brian Stevenson giving a kind of narrative background on Jeff Sessions and going even further back than the voting rights cases that he was involved in, going back to his college days when he was demonstrating his racism. So he's got this long history, and now he's Attorney General, or going to be Attorney General, at a time where, as you said, we've got this gutted Voting Rights Act. And so we've got a gutted Voting Rights Act, we've got a hostile, to say the least, Attorney General coming in. And so you've got people who are making the case that, look, we've tried this voting thing. We've had ups, we've had downs, but we continually run into these walls. As you said, we've got a Voting Rights Act that has to get renewed, periodically, and then even when it's being renewed, it's still weak. And so you've got a case that can be made that, look, perhaps we're putting too much energy into this voting strategy, and maybe some of the other strategies that we've used historically, like the very protest and marching that gave birth to the Voting Rights Act, right? Because we forget we didn't vote for the Voting Rights Act. We had to march and protest to get the Voting Rights Act. So you've got this argument that's being made that maybe, we need to shift our strategy a little bit. What do you say about that?
Wendell, before you give your answer to that, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a moment. Stay tuned. All right, again, my name is Heather Gray, and the program is Just Peace, and I'm here in the studio with Cliff Albright. We're talking with Wendell Paris. We were just talking about the Voting Rights Act and perhaps other organizing, you were saying, Cliff. So what's your response to that, Wendell?
Well, I agree that we have to have a multifaceted approach to our organizing, and we have to remain fully involved in the political process. Because the 5 minutes that you spend in that voting booth is the closest that you come to a sense of equality in this country. The 5 minutes that you spend going to vote, that's the closest you come to being equal in this country. Other than that, we're not anywhere near equal. You know, I mean, in education, especially in banking and finance, and in economic stuff, we're just not equal there. But I'm saying the multifaceted approach that we must take, including full participation in the political process, requires us to teach our dollars to have some sense. We need to be organizing economically around the resources that we have to make sure that we don't just have to run to other segments of the population at all times to get what we need to sustain ourselves and our families and to make our communities vibrant communities. So we need to be looking at how we come forward with some economic opportunities. Opportunities are not centered around job development as much as they would around entrepreneurial development. This country is geared more to entrepreneurial development, business development. Local people are going into business than anything else. But you know, we still think our pathway out is to find and to keep a job. So we need to be talking about how do we educate people to the point where they can look at and examine economic systems and see how it is that we play into that. How do we really be able to control our dollars or use our dollars in a sense that's going to make sure that the people that we spend our money with respect us. We got to have some respect for our dollars, and we got to respect our dollars ourselves. We got to go back to a better cultural understanding of things around here. And, you know, how does culture play into all of this? Well, the cultural revolution always precedes the political revolution. So you got to have a cultural understanding of self, you know, and in the 1960s, we had that basically. You know, James Brown, the godfather of soul, said loud, "I'm black, but I'm proud." Hey, James Brown, hey, before you made "I'm black and I'm proud," you made "I'm black, but I'm proud." So folks had to call James Brown on the carpet because it had to be some accountability there with folks in whatever field of life they were engaged. They had to be held up responsible, and they had to be accountable for that. And so we have to develop that accountability in our social life, in our cultural life, especially with our educational systems now is under attack, and surely in the area of economics. But at the same time, we got to stay politically involved, or else we may as well just leave this country.
One of the things I wanted to mention, Wendell, you're talking about economics. You spent a lot of your career working on cooperative development.
Yeah, right. The cooperative, by definition, is a way that local poor people especially can become involved in changing some of the economic hardships that we face across the South. One that came right out of Selma, Alabama, there was headquartered in Selma, was called the Southwest Alabama Farmers Cooperative Association. Pulled together farmers in 10 counties from across the region. And those 10 counties came together to buy fertilizer, to buy plowshare. So not only were they involved in farm machinery and buying utilities and supplies and what have you, but they were also engaged in marketing collectively. Many of the folks in the South will remember picking cucumbers and picking okra and what have you. And we just had the local markets to do that. And folks were paying us $3 for 100 pounds of cucumbers. And, you know, so SWASCA was organized to find some marketing venues that we had some modicum of control over, or that we could market outside of the confines of the rural South, items that we had grown traditionally, green beans, squash, okra, and all of that stuff.
I was just going to say, Heather and I have talked about, you know, one of our goals for the show, you know, moving forward is we want to do a series on, like, you know, this kind of economic discussions about these different economic systems and organizations and, you know, cooperatives and, you know, democratic socialists, but doing a whole little series, maybe, you know, using one show out of the month dedicated just for that. And so economic piece is it's so important because, you know, as you were talking about staying engaged in the political process, you were talking about the local efforts, and you know, and you and I talked, you know, about some independent local efforts that, you know, going back to the 60s. But in order to have independent politics, you got to have independent money, and so the two things have got to, you know, we can't any longer afford to really focus on one or the other. We've got to find a way to merge those two things so that we can be independent in our politics, but with independent money.
Well, it has to be, and you're exactly right. We need to have our own pools of capital that we use, and that's what a cooperative allows you to do, to pool your resources. It's the most democratic economic system that you can find because it's not based on everybody has a right to vote in the cooperative, regardless of how much money your patronage doesn't determine your right to vote. But the more you use it, the more you get dividends from your patronage. But everybody has an equal right to vote in the cooperative. And a cooperative calls for constant education. It calls for democratic control. And it calls for continuously building economic systems that give folks who are involved in cooperatives more control over their daily lives. It's the most democratic economic system that you can find, cooperative development. And our organization right there in Atlanta is the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, and that's the umbrella that I worked out from under basically to generate economic development among poor people.
Wendell, one of the things that I wanted to say, our time has just gone so quickly, is that it's clear that voting is obviously considered something important to whites in the South because when they're being challenged at all, they'll go after those who are voting, and they try to figure out systems to not have representation in voting. So,
yeah, well, all of those systems that's controlled by the political system have been designed and put in place really to our detriment. Starting with, well, if you don't have the right to vote, you're not a registered voter, I should say. Excuse me. If you're not a registered voter, then you can't get on the jury rolls. So you can't sit on the jury that's going to hear not only your cases sometime, but the case of people that look like you, people that live in your community. So you need to be a vibrant, an active, registered voter so that you can participate in that jury system. Because that's how they get a chance to send so many of our people, a disproportionate number of our people, off to prison, is because we don't have access to those systems. You know, in 1966, the first person that we elected after passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965 in the Black Belt, in Macon County, we elected Lucius Amerson, sheriff of Macon County. What did that do for us? Well, the first thing it did was he had the right to deputize people. And so here's this black sheriff now that can deputize folks, and every shot they fire is a legal shot. And, you know, it didn't dawn on us too much. Well, no, I guess it did about 6 months later, because here was this Alabama state trooper that went into a jail and raped an inmate, a female inmate in jail, and they filed a charge against him. So this fellow ran to George Wallace in Montgomery, and Lucius Amerson, that first black sheriff, called George Wallace and said, "I'm coming to get it." So here was George Wallace now faced with all of these armed black people coming into Montgomery to get this Alabama state trooper and arrest him. So George Wallace told him to send him to Macon County under guard so he can come and be arrested, to keep Lucius Amerson from coming into Montgomery with all of these legal shots that could be fired because you're deputizing the people. So I'm saying that's what you know, we don't look at it that way, but you know, here is, you know, you get a chance to elect those district attorneys. You get a chance to elect the folks in the, not only a lot of those judicial offices, but those other offices, the chancery offices, those offices that deal with property, land. I mean, you need to have your own people in there. That's the only way you can hold on to that land. Mm-hmm. And we know that land is the basis of all wealth. But you can't hold on to your land because you got crooked politicians at the head of that, whatever that system is, at the county level or regional level or state level. Then you have to make sure that you get those people out of there. And the best way, the quickest way, and the most effective way is through the ballot. You got to vote.
Well, Wendell, our time is just gone. There's just so much always to talk with you about. I'm wanting to thank you so much for sharing all this with us and giving us another perspective of the election and the strategies used by the president-elect, and also a discussion about the possible next Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. So we'll probably need to keep this going. Am I right, Cliff?
Mm-hmm.
More discussion about it all.
Protracted struggle.
Let me end up by saying this, Heather.
What? Go ahead.
Donald Trump did is not new. It is what the Republican Party has been nurturing since George Wallace back in the 1950s, and they have continued it, and they have brought this racist overtone. It's not an undertone; it's overtone back to full fruition in the South and in the nation now, and that is what he's running on. But it was put in place by none other than George Wallace himself. Thank you for allowing me to call me, and y'all let me know if I can be of some assistance.
Oh, wonderful, Wendell. Thank you so much. All right, take care now. Thanks.
Take care.
Atlanta, 89.3 FM, your station for progressive information. WRFG provides a voice for those who have been traditionally denied access to broadcast media through the involvement of a broad base of community elements to guarantee that access. In the utilization of the Foundation's facilities and in its programs, the following communities will receive first priority: those who continue to be denied free and open access to the broadcast media, and those who suffer oppression or exploitation based upon class, race, sex, age, creed, disability, sexual orientation, or immigrant status.